Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Firstly, apologies for the slight delay in starting. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our webinar, which today is on the theme of governance for agile delivery. Today's presenter is Chris Battersby. Chris is Audit Principal at the National Audit Office, and he's been involved in business transformation since back in the 80s with various organisations such as Philips Electronics, Deloitte, and also then Cornwell. Chris has been at the National Audit Office now, NAO, for 2 years as a digital expert, reviewing programmes across UK government and also at the United Nations. In the webinar today, Chris is going to review the 4 principles, assess their relevance as Agile has developed since 2012, and also note some of the main developments in governance for complex transformation programmes. Also, just to let you know a couple of items that at the end, the presentation will be for approximately 30 minutes today. There will be opportunity for questions, so please feel free, have your questions ready to type in. I'll read the questions back to Chris, and hopefully we'll get a really good discussion going at the end. And finally, also to mention that you can meet Chris in person next month. He's going to be speaking at the Agile Methods Conference in London, which is on the 25th of February. It's a conference comprising 3 tracks addressing Agile program and project management for all organisation sectors, then specific tracks for Agile in the finance sector and Agile in the public sector. The website for that event is unicom.co.uk, and you'll see a link on there for conferences. So now, without further ado, I will hand over to Chris.
Great. Hi, everybody. Chris Battersby here, speaking from a very empty room in the National Audit Office in London. I'd just like to start by giving you a quick background to the National Audit Office. Many of you may know of us. We are an office of nearly 800 people who audit government and make sure that the taxpayers' money is being spent wisely. That's our chief role, and it's through both audit and through what we call value for money reporting, and also doing investigations into areas where either Parliament or the public feel that money isn't being well spent across government. I'm part of the digital team here, and a big part of our role is not just to look backwards on what has happened, but to help government and government departments to look forward and to identify trends and make sure that things are set up well, so that we don't have to go and do any train crash investigations later, so we can actually work side by side with government in getting things done well and at good value. As part of one of those initiatives, back in 2012, we produced a report on governance for agile delivery. There were some pretty heavy drivers for this. As any of you, or most of you, at least from the UK, know that the coalition government came in 2010 with a big agenda to reform the civil service, and a recognition that technology, IT, transformation in government hadn't really happened over the previous 5-10 years, and value wasn't really being delivered. So there are a number of sort of sparks for a revolution. One was Martha Lane Fox coming along and writing a letter to Francis Ward saying there needs to be a change, there needs to be a transformation, at least when she was speaking, the way that web publishing happened in government. Then shortly afterwards, independent reports such as an excellent report from the Institute for Government came along and said that government needs to reform and to look at platforms for interoperability and to look at agile for responsiveness, and not to farm technology change transition out to usually large third-party companies, but for government to do it themselves, to do it well, and to be agile about it. But see, at the time, people weren't quite sure what agile was or what it meant. And if you look at some of the early reports, there's very little evidence there of things actually happening in agile. The manifesto had been around for 20 years. Products such as DSDM had been around for a long time. But to find evidence that agile was working was quite difficult. So what we did at the NAO was we went and interviewed a number of large and small companies, and you'll see them on the screen in front of you, to see what they were doing about agile. and again, it was even quite embryonic in the private sector. And if you read the report, which is probably the best way to find it is to Google it actually, but we'll have some links at the end of this presentation. Is that these were about really IT projects. They weren't about business transformation. They were organisations dipping their toes in the water of agile, but finding out how well it worked and coming up with some good pointers on how to make it go better. And I think overall from the report we found that things like the Agile Manifesto is right, and the Agile Manifesto is about balances. We found that involvement of stakeholders is absolutely crucial now when you're looking at solution development right through to major transformation, identification, involvement, right through the process. You can't give it to an IT company and tell them to come back in 2 years' time delivering your spec on time and on budget anymore. You have to be involved in a journey, in a path. There's a recognition that development needs to be incremental and iterative. Again, the old view of the 200-page spec that's delivered in a year's time was no longer valid, and it had been proved not to be valid by several instances over the previous 10 years. And also there's a strong recognition, which hasn't always been taken up, that Agile requires a lot of discipline, probably more discipline than the older approaches, because you're working at a fast clock speed, you're coordinating people, you're relying on people to deliver stuff, and they have to work in a very disciplined environment. So we pulled out 4 principles of development, and this is along the lines, I think, of the Agile Manifesto. It's not about absolutes, it's about observations, and this is about striking right balances. Actually, the principles in the report are in a slightly different order from the way I'm presenting them here, but I think this tells a slightly more cohesive story. The first principle was to focus on behaviours, not just process and document. And this is from our perspective at the NAO as auditors, as reviewers of projects and programs, in that you can't get a very good feel for what's happening in an Agile project by looking at the documentation, which had been, certainly in government with things like gateway reviews, had been a major focus. You still need to have documentation. You still need to review that documentation. You still need to have to see how it ties up. But on top of that, you have to have an ability to observe, see what's going on a program, and to be able to watch people working, watch pair programming working in pairs, watch people running Trello boards or running lean processes as it takes place, as they involve stakeholders, as they involve users. To do that, anybody assessing an Agile project really needs to know, get the plot, know how they work. It's not enough to read the text. So it probably was never, but now it's even more so. You need to be able to smell and feel the project. You have to be able to see how the team dynamics are working. You have to see how quality is controlled. You have to see things like, I feel, things like retrospectives are very, very important to see that the teams are learning from things, that the broader teams are learning, they're making recommendations, and they are following up on those recommendations. And this all helps the governance, as well as us as auditors, it helps the people governing the program. A second principle we picked out is that everybody on an Agile program is a collaborator in delivering quality. But it's not just the development team that has to collaborate, it's everybody, and it has to start with senior management. Senior management agree what quality of product they're going to get. And senior manager is stakeholders, is sponsors, etc. It's people paying for your project, paying for a transformation. They agree the quality up front. Then actual users of the service have to assure that the value of the quality of the product is being delivered. So it's not an internal thing. It's something that quality has to start at the beginning. It has to involve everybody. And it requires that discipline as well, discipline throughout. Our next principle is about teams and about metrics and monitoring not only of quality but also of progress. I think this is now very mainstream in the concept of scrums and of high-performing teams. It's not that the teams are the sole arbiters of quality of metrics, it's that the people outside the teams aren't necessarily best placed to decide how things should be measured. People within the teams need to have solid measures, they all understand and agree, and use them to learn what they're doing quickly, continuously, to improve the quality and the performance of the team. So at a pure development level, we need to be looking at the velocity, for example, of the team, the speed at which product is developed, the quality at which it is, the number of rejects, and the team needs to decide that, but within the orbit of the needs of the sponsors, the needs of the manager, and the needs of the customers of the product. The final principle is very much an agile manifesto principle. It's at the core of agile, and it's to only do things if they bring value. And this is really specifically looking at the way that value is brought to the governance of agile programs. And the first point is governance needs to have a light touch, and it needs to be proactive. The days of governance being a series of meetings that are stamped in the diary, 20 people around a table, preparation of pages and pages of documentation 3 days before the meeting that are then circulated and minuted and then outputs are provided. That at times can take up a project manager's entire working day or working week. That has to go, and things have to be much more nimble and have a lighter touch. And governance needs to be focused on what's happening at the moment. It has to be on the current activities and the future activities, especially the near plan activities, so that the role of the governance and to some degree the role also of the auditor is to look forward and to try and act to some degree as a bulldozer to find out what the future problems are and how can they be moved out of the way, rather than constantly looking backwards saying have you delivered on time and on budget, etc. I think again the discipline is very important, and the discipline of agile is extremely important. That a sprint is a sprint, a 2-week period is a 2-week period, and the delivery at the end of that is pretty sacrosanct. You have to deliver a quality product, a usable product at the end of that. But you need to move away from the more traditional focus on delivery on time and on budget. And actually, I was just thinking when I was putting this together on some previous projects I'd done where a finance director once came up to me and said, yeah, great meeting, but Chris, could you just tell me what the opposite of slippage is? Because what you do at project meetings is you report slippage and apologise for things that didn't quite work. I've never worked on a project that actually finished a day early. Everything finished on time, or there was slippage and it finished late. And this is something you need to avoid. You need to have the discipline to deliver on time, but also to govern with a light hand, to govern at the right time, and to govern in a way that doesn't hold up the project with any bureaucracy. So those are 4 principles that we managed to pull out from that let's say, skim of what was happening in industry. And as I say, it was in an industry that was starting to introduce agile approaches, starting to understand the manifesto, starting to develop approaches, but very much focused on software development, not on business transformation. I think since 2012, and that's not a huge amount of time ago, quite a lot has happened. Firstly, agile is now the way of developing software. Scrum, sprints, early delivery, minimal usable subsets. unfortunately, there's a lot of jargon involved in Agile. It'd be good if there were less, but I think the jargon is becoming better understood across the board. We also found that the old certainties of project management that were developed for very good reason, and in government developed very well with products such as Prince2, MSP, etc., developed by the US armaments industry, etc., with PERT, Gantt charts, etc. They don't fit the Agile model well. However, certainty still required. There's a different type of certainty. There's a certainty that you have to deliver the product at best value. It has to, a product, whether that be a piece of software or a transformation of a business, has to be clearly understood by the people paying for it, the people receiving it, the customers, the suppliers, etc. And it has to have certainties and disciplines in the way it is managed, in the way it is tracked. And my final point here on things that have happened is that Agile business transformation still remains unproven. I think there are a lot of examples where Agile software development has worked very well and it saved government a large amount of money in the UK, and I'm sure it has across the world. I'm sure it saved industry money. But Agile, the word is being bandied around and used for much bigger programs and transformations. And it is early days. There are examples where, and the NAO has reported on examples where it has not been particularly successful in doing something complex and difficult as transforming the way the government department manages things, transforming the transactional processes that can be very big and messy and very reliant on very fixed things like legacy systems, things that get in the way like policy and the law. To get around that is very difficult, and people are still learning. But I think people have learned that the modern world of transformation, the modern world of Agile, is about delivering value, not just specification. But they're also learning that you still need to deliver a working product. You still need to deliver something that works. And people still need to realise, and I think this has always been a tension between people who see themselves as IT and people who are in the business and their customers, that the sponsor or the manager still needs to be in control of the process, in control of the money they're spending, in control of the outputs and outcomes. And finally, I see some themes emerging within the world of Agile. I'll block them, lay them all down on the screen in front of you. I think the first thing is that there are a lot of new roles emerging. I think this has been very useful, certainly in government, of moving these roles out of being seen as IT roles into being business roles. And at the National Audit Office, we recently carried out a survey of skills in transformation and in government, and a major finding of that was that a lot of these roles are still seen by the business as being IT roles, when actually they have to be business roles. Digital leaders have to know about technology, but more importantly, they have to know about business change and what the business is doing, what it can do. The roles that I think continue to be, certainly the service manager continues to be quite specific to government, is a role that bridges the technology and the business change. The second area that is emerging is that there are hybrid approaches emerging. You could say that, yes, they're all Agile, you could say they're all transformation management, but the evangelism that you can do everything using Agile is not always valid. And we've noticed that things such as Prince2 has now been adjusted. I don't know if Keith Richards is listening to this, but it's been well adjusted to take account of Agile, the Agile Manifesto, and Agile ways of working, so that there is still, a manual, something you can use to add that discipline to your programs. The Government Green Book has been adapted to enable Agile to say that you don't need to do a full business case at the outset. You use Agile techniques, Agile discovery and alphas to be able to make a much better prediction for your business case and to nail things down more firmly, but at a time when you've actually done some discovery and you've tried things out and know what works and what doesn't work. And the Major Projects Authority, which I think has recently changed its name actually, but the government internal audit of and assessors of big projects have issued new changes and guidelines, which are well worth reading. The next point is the theme of the scope and approach of government. I think we touched on it certainly in the principles, but governance is now seen in a lot of successful projects as being about assuring value. It's not just about compliance and conformance. And the approach taken is very different. It's moving away from this SRO, senior responsible owner, which keeps being reinterpreted as senior responsible officer, holding a formal meeting every month or 2 months or whatever, saying, are we on track, have we delivered our PIDs, to having a much more fluid operation of governance, where governance meets at the right times, at the times when they are best suited to make decisions on a program. This could be at program milestones, it could be at key events in the business, it could be at key events in the project, but it's meeting them and aligning things with the clock speed of all the different moving cogs and wheels within what nowadays is becoming a complex program of transformation. And the final point is that procurement approaches and skills, procurement approaches are changing. Government has I think we're now on our probably 6th or 7th iteration of the digital marketplace, which is now covering the digital services framework. It's covering G-Cloud, it's covering cloud hosting, and it is making it easier to buy and easier to sell into government. The government digital service is now established. The GDS has now been there for probably 4 years, getting close to 5 years, as a centre of expertise, developing guidelines, developing approaches, and developing people. The major departments are all developing people, putting a lot of effort from the apprentice level to recruiting senior people into senior roles. Government is forging ahead with leadership academies, centres of excellence, and with digital strategies that means something to the departments and the businesses, and aren't just sort of cut and paste of a generic digital strategy. Things are becoming embedded. Skills are developing, but as we found in our skills review, there is still a huge skill shortage in government and also across industry. Some of these key skills, such as architects, such as business architects especially, and these hybrid skills are in very short supply, and they need to be developed, and I hope things move ahead both so in the universities and in departments and in apprentices, etc. I think one other major theme covering all of these things, the roles, the approaches, the governance, is that we found during several recent reviews that it's really, really important for the governance to be agreed at the start of transformations, at the start of agile programs, and then obviously to be continuously improved, but to get the rules straight at the beginning and for them not to emerge through the programs, as we found with a lot of programs we've reviewed in the last 6 months or so, that governance arrangements keep changing, and it's not good enough to hope that they'll get it right in the end or it'll be all right in the night. There needs to be a lot of effort put in up front, and thought and agreement up front, to say this is how we're going to govern this complex transformation. So, in summary, 4 years ago we looked at Agile and produced a review. It was very early days. and it was looking at governance and agile teams in software development largely. Since then, and it's a very short period of time, see there's been GDS acting very strongly to promote agile from the centre of government. There have also been many areas in government departments where really good practices have evolved in delivering and in governing agile programs. And I think there's now a realisation that needs are changing, things are being updated, new approaches are emerging. I won't say they're nailed down yet, but they are emerging. And there's a very strong recognition that to move forward, and this is where we are particularly interested in the National Audit Office, that there needs to be some quite major transformation and change across the way things work across the UK. And it's not just about changing IT and buying a new magic bullet. It's about business transformation. It's about developing new models, about applying new principles and attitudes, and getting it all to work cohesively. And for that to happen, we need to continually work on getting governance better. Thank you very much for your time on that quick rattle through our report and findings since. I'll hand back to Alec to see if there are any questions coming through.
Thanks, Chris. We'll just give it a minute for questions. Thank you very much indeed for a great presentation. Just a reminder that you can meet Chris on 25th of February at the Agile Methods Conference. It's in London at the Millennium Gloucester Hotel. He's going to be one of our staff speakers there. The website again is unicom.co.uk. Chris, we've got our first question come in. I'll just read it back to you. What do you see as the barriers to getting Agile to work in government?
I think with barriers, there probably, and there'll certainly be more than I say now. But and I've come very much from the private sector, and it's been a very interesting immersion, baptism in different ways of working. But I think the first thing I found is that government is huge. Government is big and messy, and government can't, like you can in the private sector, go around choosing its customers. If you are delivering a service, you deliver it to the entire population, every citizen. And therefore the scale of anything is big. And it's by necessity messy. You can't chop off the tail end of customers. In fact, they're usually the ones you need to focus on most. And so governing this complexity is going to be difficult. And obviously it requires a discipline, but it requires an awful lot of understanding. It requires the people who really know the business, people certainly at the sharp end of government, to be very much involved in agile transformation. Second point I've already raised in the as we've gone through the principles has been the skills, the shortage of skills across the board, especially technical skills such as business architects, people who understand data, people who understand target operating models and how you can actually get them to work properly, people who understand transformation and who understand how to manage transformation, which isn't the same as administrating a project. It's about people with those softer skills in transformation management, and they're essential to transformations in governance. I think the next barrier is getting buy-in across departments, of disabusing people from thinking that this is the transformation and agile transformation is an IT thing. It's not. It's a business thing, and the whole department has to buy into that, and they can't sit there saying, "Oh, the hole's not at my end of the boat," or whether they all have to be involved. And that's difficult when people didn't join the civil service or the organisation you work for, whatever, to do IT. It's not doing IT. It's about doing transformation. It's about changing and making your organisation better. I think the final challenge, which seen, as Agile storms and forms its way around different departments, is getting the balance right. And the Agile Manifesto is very clear about the fact that it was all balances and getting them right. I said at the beginning there are no absolutes in the way you do these things. There's no, here's a textbook, do that and you'll get it right, and here's a textbook, do that, and the NAO will say, well done, we'll sign off your account. It's about knowing where you are on the spectrum between getting the discipline right and getting the flexibility right, getting the people to work optimally, and getting them to work on the things you want them to do optimally, etc. So it's the four segments of the Agile Manifesto, and getting those right, the same as what I just said on governance, getting the rules right, getting them right at the start, and then following. So I think that's, I'm sure there are more things in there, and I don't know if anybody has any feedback that will be useful for me today. What about X, Y, Z? Because I think there are other areas, but they, for me, are pretty key areas where it's difficult in government, and government needs to get these areas right.
Thanks, Chris. We've got lots of questions coming in, so apologies if we don't get to everybody's question, but I'll read from the top. A question from Saravanan. The question is, what is the acceptance level in government for such change in thoughts towards governance?
Yeah, a very, very good question. And I suppose, I don't actually work for the government. I work for the National Audit Office, so I work for Parliament. So it's I can't speak on behalf of the government, but what I can say is from the reviews and reports and the general intelligence we're gathering is that the acceptance level, I think, once the team realises it's all about involvement and understanding, then they are there to steer a transformation through a course. I think financially there's still really quite prescriptive acceptance levels that the business case is defined, it's agreed by Treasury for all major projects, and you have to stick to that business case. But when it comes down to actually how you govern on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, I think there's now a lot of flexibility emerging, and that flexibility is working well. And I think as the NAO, we would say, is it fit for purpose? Yes. What was the purpose? Well, you need to define the purpose first, and then define the fitness, and then adapt to fit with that. And so I don't know how well that answers your question, but I think it's a bit horses for courses, but there is flexibility in government. There isn't as much prescription as there was 3-4 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. And here we think that's a good move.
Thanks, Chris. I'll read back another question for you. This is from Louise. Have you seen anything in an environment where you have traditional projects and agile projects working in the same organisation and sharing common elements for governance?
We have seen areas where that hasn't been a particularly happy marriage, and maybe I may explore this more at the conference in February. And if Louise could have a look at the recent report we did on CAPD, the Government Rural Payments Programme, which had a mix of traditional approaches and agile approaches, and there's quite a lot of commentary on how they didn't fit well together. Some of the commentary, for example, was that the agile team was on one floor of the building and the trad team was on another floor of the building, and one lot wore t-shirts and one lot wore suits, and it didn't fit well together. We were pretty critical of that because I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's about suits and t-shirts. It's about collaboration and coordination and effective governance above above the working style of the project. So certainly food for thought for the conference there.
Thanks. Another good question come in. This one's from Greg. What information radiators have you found effective in Agile for Government as a part of governance?
Information radiators.
Yeah, that's the question.
I think something looking at government and looking at the work I specifically have done is the walking the floors of programs. Everybody uses post-its and boards and increasingly formal products such as Trello. to give a visual display of the project. And I think a well-organized program office, and this isn't just about the software development side, this is about, I hope that there will be user stories for things like security, non-functional type requirements, user stories for communications generally across across a program or a transformation. That if that is clean and clear, then the wall is a bloody good place to start to see, you know, where the hotspots are, where things are going well and badly. As long as people are honest about using it and clear about how it's used. So, for example, where you see the failure rates for sprints, if we can see the backlog of retests, the backlog of fails, then that's a good radiator. And I still haven't seen, let's say, I haven't seen things like a burn down chart I'm particularly comfortable with. I think there are some of these constructs. Personally, I haven't got much benefit from them as a radiator. But I think, from the governance perspective, if that governance team is walking around asking you questions, attending the retrospectives, people are being honest, then, you know, you can warm your hands and feet on that, and still you need to go back to, and by the way, you know, has this delivered the charge? Has this delivered all the must-have requirements? Does this product work? Does this product deliver value? Which still have to be done by the governance team. But the radiators, these things, and you could say some of these are, let's say, proxy values that you know, after a long time doing projects, you tend to notice that if things are well structured, if people are seen to be talking to each other but not chatting, if things are clearly put up on boards and they make sense, and stories are stories, not just do process 1.21 again. It is, you know, I want to deliver something for this purpose, which gives this value, which has this risk, which is mitigated by that. Then that's all good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. I've got quite a lot of questions coming in, so we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. I'm just slightly conscious of the time. Very interesting question here from Ricky. Has there been any consideration given to running a portfolio in an agile manner?
Well, obviously, yes, very much so. You know, there are products developed such as SAFE, which are designed for running portfolios. And I think if you are governing, you know, when I talk about transformation, it's difficult to do transformation without it being a portfolio of change, of development, of process modeling, of complex stakeholder management, etc. So yes, there are formal approaches. Yes, I think the MPA guidelines are good on how to look at good practices in managing portfolios. And yes, I would say that several of the programs we have reviewed have been at that level, you know, where it is about, you know, investing in change and transformation rather than setting money aside for projects and investing in projects. I still haven't seen, and it'd be great if somebody could come back with an answer to this one. Still haven't seen SAFE actually applied, and I know Dean Leffingwell is a very good thinker on agile and how agile can be expanded up to program and portfolio levels, but I haven't seen it actually applied in any of the programs I've looked at.
Thank you. A question from Robert. How does government go about managing risk on an agile project?
Really, from what I've observed and the things we are looking for, is much as the way you manage risk in any project. It's that you have to identify the risks and identify the mitigations. What I've found on one project we looked at, which had very much turned around something that had been failing for several years, was that they were developing user stories particularly focused on risk. So it wasn't just, and I think going back to the old days of the program board and of 20 people sitting in a room trying desperately to understand 40 points on a risk register. This was the department or the program team there saying, okay, we've got a very risky area, let's develop a user story. And in fact, I think they've ended up with about 26 stories that say, okay, we've got risk here, how are we going to mitigate the risk? What is the risk? How are we going to face it? How are we going to offset it? How are we going to look at the options for avoiding or at least mitigating that risk? And how are we going to work that through right to the end where we are delivering value with an awareness of that risk and with a mitigation of that risk? And I think that was quite a breakthrough, I think, and it wasn't something I expected, it wasn't something we asked for, but it came out of one particular department. And I'm sure there are other departments working through similar issues and taking, I hope, similar approaches to say risk isn't just something that sits on the side of the program, it's something that needs to be embedded in the way you go about your work, and you need to identify up front and you need to avoid. Another small area was with actually a supplier that was saying, well, the good thing about agile is that you identify your risky areas up front and then you approach them, and this, the fail early lessons of agile are extremely pertinent on the areas of risk. Our mitigation of that risk doesn't work, at least we found out now, let's take another approach before we push all that to the end of the project and deliver something that is inherently risky.
Just an addendum to that same question from Robert, is this with a risk burn down?
I see where you're coming from, yes. Effectively, traditional projects have had a risk burn down in that you have your register and then you strike things off as you mitigate them, but other ones arrive at the bottom of the list and burn up. So I haven't actually seen a risk burn down in place, but it sounds like a good way of showing another radiator, showing another way of program and project progress. But I haven't seen one in action. It'd be good, again, to find out from anybody writing in to say, now actually have a look at this, Chris, it's good.
Thanks, Chris. One question from Brendan. Have you observed many examples of hybrid approaches working?
Yes. Although quite difficult to describe what the hybrid approach is, because actually, waterfall isn't a formal methodology. I think it's like many words in the English language. It was developed as an insult to start with, and then it just became a way of thinking. But what we've seen is that in departments, where you are sort of low risk, trying to develop something new, trying to try something out, you can be very agile and upfront and trying things out on screen or web front ends, and that needs to be or can be, say, very agile. And at the other end of that, much of work in government has to be about integration with the back end, with formal processes that are very often enshrined in law. You can't be agile about law. The law is law. Policy is policy, and you have to fit with that. So there is actually a very wide range of approaches that need to be taken in government, and it is unfortunate sometimes when you see people trying to be agile in an area where actually you need a straightforward engineering solution to say, yeah, we need to do this in a very sequential way, the rules are known, the required output and outcome is very clear. You don't need to be agile and flexible, you just need to get on and deliver it. You just need to write that API, that interface. You don't need to do anything else. And at other ends, you need to be very agile to say, okay, we've got this fixed thing, how can we best deliver that out to a customer using new technologies? Let's try lots of different agile ways of doing it, and then nail down and join up the traditional back end and the agile front end, for example. So that happens all the time.
Thanks, Chris.
At the NAO, we look at big programs. We don't really look at one-off agile developments. We look at transformations and programs. Sorry.
Sorry, Chris, I just wanted to check with you. We're slightly over time. Are you okay to take a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm very hungry, but I'm quite happy to answer a couple more things.
Well, should we do two more questions? And we've got
Yeah,
some really good questions. Once again, I just apologise if we can't get to everybody's question today. One of the questions, this one's from Julia. You stated that it's best to agree the governance framework up front at the start of a transformation rather than change it throughout the project. But would it not be beneficial for continuous review of the governance approach and allow for it to evolve as per agile principles?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. I hope I wasn't. I thought I'd mention that, but obviously the words didn't come out of my mouth either right or at all. In that, yeah, continuous improvement is essential. Not just continuous improvement to improve the way you are governing, but at different stages of a program or a transformation's evolution, you need to govern it in different ways. So it's not just about, okay, our governance model is we're going to meet every Tuesday and we're going to go through the risk register and the project plan and Gantt chart, etc. At different stages, you need to have different models. You need to evolve, and absolutely right, Julia, that this is about continuous improvement, and ideally, and I've suggested it to people, but I haven't seen them taking up yet, just as with a sprint, you know, at the end of a governance meeting, you should have a retrospective and say, how can we do this governance meeting better next time, rather than let's have lunch, which tends to be the outcome. But also, as you go through a program, governance is about making decisions. It's not about getting warm and cuddly feelings about how well the project's going. So you need to get together in that governance forum the people who need to make the decisions. And they will vary through a program. They will be the change people, the HR people, the technical people, the business people, the suppliers. And you need to get them involved. And you need to get them to make decisions at the right point in time for the program. So there's that evolution. And there's also the evolution of doing it better every time, which is, yes, agile principles. And I hope those principles were always there in traditional projects, but somehow things got a bit too stamped out so that people were administrating projects rather than managing them, certainly in government. And it's good to see people actually getting up there and managing and taking on and realising in government, as in any organisation, the risk is with them. It's not with the suppliers or somebody outside. They hold the risk. They need to mitigate it, and they need to mitigate it by making right decisions and changing things when things need changing. Thank you. But good point. Good point.
Thanks, Chris. I think you've got time. We'll take just one more question. This question from John is quite a nice one to round up with. Have you been able to measure the effectiveness of agile versus traditional delivery methods and provide evidence that agile is a better method?
A very short answer to that is no. We'd love to. We'd absolutely love to have a control experiment and an agile one. But we haven't been able to, and I don't think anybody else has yet managed to prove that. You know, there have been many statements. I think part of the, if not the 2011 government digital strategy, or one of the statements made in the House, was that agile delivers things at 20% lower cost. That hasn't been proven. I don't think it ever was proven. I don't know where it came from, but it was sort of nailed onto the manifesto tree. I don't think the Agile manifesto said it makes things cheaper. It just said it makes things better. So no, and I'd love there to be. I think I'd love there to be, but another part of me says, well, no, the world's changing. Let's not try and compare, because you need to pick the right approach for the problem you're addressing, and it may not help that, but the answer is sorry, no, there's nothing to say agile is cheaper that I found. And if anybody else can write in and say, yeah, here are the benchmarks, great, I'd love to see them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chris. Well, I think that rounds up our webinar today. Again, thank you, and sorry again we couldn't get to everybody's questions. It's been a fantastic response today, lots of obviously a lot of interest in the presentation. We will be, by the way, making a recording of this available if you'd like to listen to the presentation again or to share with your colleagues. We'll email everybody who's attended today a link in the next few days. And again, hopefully we'll see some of you and you'll be able to meet Chris in person on the 25th of Feb at the Agile Method.